currently 1 p.m. Monday here in LA. Why is that important? Believe it or not, it's the only time of the day where there's hardly any traffic. So let's run over to the Hustler. Max Payne Mondays today. Hopefully we can get into some shenanigans otherwise. Let's go play some poker. But moving forward, we're going to be doing something called an organized or a private game. It'll be hosted live at the bike in their private room, which is called the Legends Room. There's no specific dates, there's no specific times. It'll vary depending on people's schedules. But the point is, it's going to be a one table, $2, $5, $10, 3 blind game. We want to make something that's similar to Max Payne Monday. We're just trying to put on a fun game. So if that's something that interests you, let me know. All you have to do is DM me in Instagram.
Let's get into this very first hand. We're playing 6-handed. The game is 5, 10, 20, 40. This is a massive game, a ton of fun to be in. I start off the game in for $3,000. And in this very first hand, there's a double straddle, or I guess technically a single straddle, as the $20 plays as the third blind, as it's mandatory. The small blind decides to limp for $40. I'm in the third blind, and I look down at ace-3 offsuit. I don't think this hand is that good as a just call. I think I'd rather play aggressively here with my ace blocker. So I decide to do that. I isolate a 160. The straddle and the small blind make the call, which is never a good sign to see, especially when the flop comes King Jack 5 rainbow. With the action on me, the one thing I think I can say for certain here, my hand is not that great on the specific board texture, but again, my range is going to be crushing this board. Either way, I decided to bet out $140. Only the straddler makes a call. The small blind folds. We're going off to a turn card that comes to 4 of hearts. This is a really good card for many reasons. One of them being I now pick up some extra equity, so I'm at least not blasting into the abyss. If I somehow hit the wheel on the river as a miracle card, we can just go massive, as we will be super sneakily in there. With all that being said, I think it's about time to start cranking up the price of poker. I make it $375. Our opponent thinks about it for a moment before deciding on a fold. Luckily for us, we get that through. Even more lucky when the opponent shows us a jack in his hand. Happy to take that pot down. Moving on, in this next hand, the button is where I find myself, and I look down at a pretty suited ace here. I make it $60 to go. Only the big blind calls, and we're going off to a flop that comes 7, 6, 5 rainbow. With the action checked over to me, I think this is where I make my first mistake. I end up checking it, but the reasoning in current game is that I thought that, oh, I'm probably never going to be hitting this board too often. It's probably good for the big blind. One, I'm going to be raising every single suited combination here from the button. Somewhere in the neighborhood of like 70 or 60% of hands I'm going to be opening from the button. And even more so when there's a straddle, or I guess the third blind in there, as there's a ton of dead money in the middle. I can still have the nut advantage here. I can definitely have a hand even as weak as 8-4 suited here. In real time, I decided to check it through, and the turn card comes as 6 of hearts. Doesn't change a whole lot here. It pairs the second card, and when my opponent checks to me, I can see now pretty easily that our opponent has some form of showdown value. I think this is another spot where I can consider betting. I decided to check it over, and we're going off to a river card that comes as 7 of diamonds. All right, so now the board is double paired, and when the opponent checks over to me, we can merge bet here. We can bet to get weaker aces, or excuse me, better ace highs to fold. I mean, they'd only be folding a chop here, but beyond that, we can definitely get value from king high sometime as well. So when we bet and get called by an ace, it's not the end of the world. We chop the pot. But when we bet and get an ace high to fold, that's awesome. And then same thing if king high decides to call. Either way, I end up just checking it back. I know, long-winded, excuse me for that, but our opponent ends up showing ace 5 of spades here. He flopped himself middle pair, or bottom pair, excuse me, ended up getting counterfeited by the river. I think our opponent had a very easy fold on the river if I really fought for this pot. If you're not paying attention, and little things like this, I think are pretty important, and unfortunately I couldn't really jump on that. Anyways, in this next hand, Under the Gun decides to make it $60. The button decides to make the call. I find myself in the small blind with pocket 10s here. I decided 3-bet here to $275. From the small blind, it's probably best to play a 3-bet or fold strategy, especially against what I perceive to be a pretty strong player. The button player is definitely a fun player. He goes by the name or moniker of DK, and you guys see him on the Max Payne Monday streams. Initial raiser decides to fold, and DK from the button makes a call. And we're going off to a flop that comes 6-5 deuce with 2 clubs and a diamond. This is a pretty good flop for our specific hand, not that great for our holding. We actually don't have a club here, so what we can do is go on the bigger size of a C-bet. I decided to C-bet here for $350. Realize it's bigger than half the size of the pot, but, you know, it's cool. We're living with it. Our opponent tanks for quite some time before eventually folding what he says was a flush draw. Unlucky for us, or maybe lucky, feels like a club has been coming all year, just keeps coming, but happy to take it down nonetheless. Moving along. In this following hand, there's a lot of dynamics that go on, so I'm going to do my best to break that all down for you. The cutoff limps here, I find myself in the button with pocket jiggities, pocket jacks, gotta raise the price of poker. $100 is the new price of the game of Texas Hold'em. The big blind and the cutoff make the call here. We're going off to a flop that's pretty reasonable as it comes 9-7 deuce rainbow. With the action over to me, I decided to throw out a c-bet here, a pretty healthy one, about half the size of the pot, $250. Our opponent here from the big blind decides to make the fold. Now the action's on the cutoff. He decides to make the call here. From the turn card comes the ace of clubs. A really wet card here as it brings a backdoor flush draw, and it brings an overcard to my pair of jacks. With the action over to me, I think that's just a pretty good spot to actually continue to go for value. Our opponent can definitely have a hand like 10-8, Jack 10 of clubs, random holdings like such, and if that's the case, I think it's a good idea to go for value. I bet $240. Again, a little thin maybe, but against DK, I can promise you if you guys watch Max Payne Monday ever, it makes sense. What makes even more sense, maybe in a bad way or a good way depending on how you see it, DK decides to tank jam all in for 600 more. His jam is for a total of $840. This is a little bit of a frustrating spot for sure, but it is DK, and DK has shown the propensity to go wild with weird hands. So I'm never going to fold here. I decide to make the call here. We agree to run it twice, and the first board comes out the 3 of clubs, which is not good as it brings a backdoor flush draw. And the second board is not any better as it comes a 10 of hearts. Our opponent pretty quickly shows ace 8 offsuit, so all good. DK's really fun person to be around, great for the game. So when you lose, you just got to tip your cap off and roll with the punches. At this point, if I'm not mistaken, we are 5 or 6 handed here. The action folds to me on the button. I decide to make it $60 to go. The small blind decides to 3-bet to 260, which is a little bit on the bigger side, and the action's back onto me. I think at this point, my hand's just a little too good to make the fold, so I decide to make the call. We're going off to a flop that comes ace 6-5 diamond club. At this point, we are now caught up with the video, and the action's checked over to me. I think about it for a moment, so I decided to just check it back, see if I can't realize some of my equity by making a pair or adding some kind of draw. The turn card gives us none of that as it comes with 4 of hearts. The one thing I will know is that this is a card that's going to be better for my range than my opponent's range. And when the action checked over to me again, I'm in the middle of a couple of different things, but I decided it's best to just try to get my queen high to showdown. Anyways, I end up checking it back in real time, and we're going off to a river card that comes in 9 of diamonds. Our opponent doesn't even allow us to make any stupid moves as he just bombs it. $800. Going like 1.5x here, a massive bet here on the river. I definitely think our opponent's good enough to do this with a hand like King Queen with just the King of Diamonds. I don't think our opponent's ever doing this with a straight or just a pair of aces. It's kind of like a flush or nothing. The only reason I'm even mentioning this is because I was trying or considering doing the rebluff here. I ended up making the fold here. Pretty easy, I guess, but either way, good hand to you, sir. Moving along. This next hand is a PLO bomb pot double board variety. It's an absolute disaster. So let's hop right into it. In this hand, it's $50. Everyone goes in blind pre-flop. We're playing PLO, so you have to use 2 of your hold cards. And there's 2 boards. So to scoop, you have to win both boards, obviously. And you can chop the pot here without playing PLO high-low or PLO 8 or whatever the heck. Anyways, and the flop on the top board comes 8-8-4 rainbow, and the bottom board comes 2-3-4 rainbow. With the action checked over to me here, I realize I have an absolute monster. That gives us the absolute nuts on one board and a reasonable blocker, I guess, on the top board. The action ends up checking through as I decide to play this a little sneakily. As like they say, it's hard to keep the nuts on the flop and them to still be the nuts on the river as the boards change so drastically. Either way, we're going off to a turn card that is a pretty reasonable as it comes a deuce of hearts in the top board and a jack of clubs on the bottom board. This does bring a backdoor flush draw. We still somehow have the nuts on one of the boards and a pretty reasonable blocker on the other one. DK leads out for $125 with the action on me. I'm not a professional at PLO bomb pots, specifically PLO double board bomb pots. I have no idea what I'm doing. But if I have the nuts on one board, it feels like a good idea to play aggressive here. Of course, worst case scenario, we can get quartered, which is not fun, but we do have a backup plan. I decide to pot it here to $825. Everyone else decides to make the fold. DK makes the call. And we're going off to a river card that comes the 8 of clubs on the top board bringing in trips on the board, and the bottom board comes in a queen of clubs. We now make the second nut flush here on the bottom board. A little worrying when DK just snap rips it all in for about $1,200 was what I have effective behind. I'm never folding again. I'm just not good enough to do it. Of course, our opponent can still have the ace high clubs. I decide to make the call, and I don't believe what I see. And not in the way you're thinking. We show our hand, and our opponent shows Jack 7, 7, 10. Yeah. So DK wins the top board with 7s, 8s full of 7s, and I win the bottom board with a flush. I don't know how the heck DK is in his hand still, but glory be to him, because he's definitely given a ton of action here. And this is like what we talked about earlier with the pocket jacks hand, is like, yeah, maybe a little frustrating that he did have an ace there, but when that kind of stuff, what is going on right here? This is crazy. That was a really funny hand. Here we are wrapping up today's session, and we have a really interesting hand to go over that I'm actually interested to hear the chat pros. So today, it's been long, very long since we've done this, but today this is your chat pro hand of the day. Interested to see what you guys have to say, so hold your comments till whenever you guys feel like you should comment. Let's hop into this hand. We're playing 4 or 5 hand at this point. The action folds to me in the small blind. I decide to make it $60 to go. The big blind decides to 3-bet here to $210. The action is now on me. I think I have a really good hand here. It's never fun to be out of position, but I think I definitely got to make the call here. So I end up doing just that. We're going off to a flop that comes Jack 6-3 rainbow. Bingo. That's a great flop for us in many ways, specifically because it's a pretty dry flop, not a whole lot of equity out there. And secondly, we have top pair second nut kicker. I start with the check here, continuing to play in flow. And our opponent, who's actually a viewer of the vlog, shout out to him, he c-bets for $175. Seems like this is going to be a pretty reasonable range bet. Either way, never folding, I call. We're going off to a turn card. There comes a 4 of hearts. Again, doesn't change a whole lot here. It does add a backdoor flush draw. And that is something reasonable because our opponent's definitely going to have a hand like ace 5 of hearts here, picking up that backdoor flush draw as well as that backdoor wheel draw. There's a lot more than just pocket aces, pocket kings, and pocket queens. Either way, I continue with the check and our opponent decides to bet $350. I decide to make the call. There's not much other things to do. And we're going off to a river card that comes the 8 of clubs. Absolute brick, changes literally nothing to anybody's holding. And I decide to check it over one last time to our opponent. And he decides to bet out to the tune of all in. $1,250 is what I have left in my stack. Whether he realizes it or not, I'm pretty sure he does because he's good enough to do that. We're in a really tough situation and he's made a really, really good bet. His bet sizings has left us with about 0.8 or 1-to-1 SPR, which is outstanding. The frustrating part is that I think our opponent is actually good enough to have hands that are not aces, kings, and queens here. I think our opponent can definitely go for 3 streets of value with all of those holdings, but I think our opponent's definitely going to also have to blast off here with his ace X of heart hands. All of that being said, I find myself in the tank and frustrated, and you can hear from the table talk audio how I try to range him.
Never know, man. The gambling world,
You have aces or like ace king of hearts or ace king of spades.
Sensors up underneath the table.
Ace king of
They can
spades,
play
ace
naked, man.
10 of spades, ace 10 of hearts. Actually, there's more hands. Oh man, there's just so much money. Like, how do you think I ever can fold?
As you guys can see there, I come up with a credible amount of value holdings. I also come up with a credible amount of bluffs here. I end up making the call, the hero call of sorts, and our opponent does in fact show the old pocket aces. Outstanding play by our opponent here. Nothing in the world we can take away from him. Perfectly played. I'd hope that my opponent's strong enough or good enough, I promise you I think he is, to continue betting that river or that run out with an ace X of hearts, or specifically a bluff for that matter. Either way, we're going to go ahead and chalk up today's L. Don't feel like we played all that bad. Feels like things just were kind of in the middle. Either way, I appreciate you guys all for watching. Let's start over to me in person and see how we are feeling.
All right, so unfortunately that's going to do it for our session there. I'm not sure if we played bad or ran bad, or both. To be quite fair, it feels like I just kept running into it, and then the hands with the jacks against DK, it's against DK, so I think we just call off, and we're going to be ahead a ton of the time, but I'm going to go home, eat, or stay and play 5-5 So we'll figure it out. We're in today's game for 4,000 and out for a grand total of $0. Another loss that is annoying, but I mean, relatively speaking, the 40 was on pretty consistently. So we're gonna call it a day there. Thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate it. Let's hop in. I don't know. Let's figure out what we're gonna do now. See you guys soon.